on causal diagrams for climate mobility archetypes. That could be a very interactive, very important tutorial session. He has designed some important tasks and other things for you. So I request Alex to continue this session, please. Thank you.
Sorry for the delay in starting, but I think we'll make up time as we go. So thank you very much, Professor Rahman. So what are we talking about when we're talking about causal diagrams, and why do we do it? Do I need to turn this on? Can you advance the slide? Sure, if this is, oh, do I have to turn it on? There it is. You know, this is the way we academics work. We have a computer problem. We go to the computer tech and say, what's the problem? I can't seem to work this thing. He said, have you tried turning it on? So here we go. So why do we develop these diagrams in the first place, and why are we going to go through this exercise? This is really to get you ready for the next few days, where we'll be turning our attention from the concepts of demographic properties of populations and population dynamics and social vulnerability and some of the climate stressors that we looked at yesterday, and then some of the urban things we looked at this morning. We're going to be turning more and more to climate mobility per se and what's going on in the world related to climate mobility. And so what we will be doing today is developing a few causal diagrams. I think you've read the document, so you have a general idea. But basically, we do it because socioecological systems are complex, and causal models can help break down the components. And it's also often a first step in actual quantitative modeling. So if you want to, I'll show you quantitative. We'll be talking about modeling on Thursday or Friday, and we'll be discussing more the nature of what people are doing now, what the different approaches are to modeling climate mobility. But to begin with, a lot of these groups are actually developing fairly complicated causal diagrams to show the relationships between the parts of the system. Also, we all carry around our own ideas in our heads about the way things interrelate with one another. But much like putting words down on paper helps clarify our thoughts, putting things together in a causal diagram actually helps us understand and better clarify the relationships between the components in the system. So, you say, well, I think in general, that certain behaviors are associated with X, Y, Z. Well, if you put it in a causal diagram, you'll actually be able to clarify that. I quote from Perch Nelson, who says, conceptual models can offer an overall picture of the relevant processes and are also able to treat the connection between climate change and migration on an intermediate level between the common sense approach, which is, hey, everybody knows that climate is related to migration. Hey, what's the big deal? To a more systematic approach in case studies. I don't know if I turn this off again or I need to point it. Sorry, the battery seems... Thanks. Let's see if that works. All right. Every time he touches this thing, you notice it works, and every time I touch it, it doesn't. Okay, so you've already read about these archetypes. Archetypes, Plato, or was it Plato used archetypes to basically describe like the perfect horse, the perfect car, or whatever. He didn't have cars, but chariot or whatnot. In this case, I'm talking about kind of prototypical cases of, typical cases where some climate variable is interacting with livelihood systems in ways that will engender potential outmigration from an area. So that's what I'm talking about. And drylands are one case, highland areas are another. Peri-urban areas might be more recipient areas, but they can also be places of onward migration. Sometimes people first arrive in an informal settlement, then they might move elsewhere in a city. Fishing villages on the coast, relate to fishing communities. Rural rice growing and agrarian communities in delta areas might be another prototypical case. and indigenous communities. And here I actually sought for but did not find precisely what I was looking for. I know there's some cases on the scheduled tribes in India and looking at issues around migration, but I wanted to look specifically at climate mobility, and I didn't find anything immediately. There was a more statistical case at a national level looking at these relationships, but I chose not to use it. But I'd love to know more. If there's someone who knows of a tribal case study, I'd love scheduled cast or scheduled tribe case study. I'd love to see it. So socioecological systems consist of the bio-geophysical unit and its associated social actors and institutions. Socioecological systems are complex and adaptive and delimited by spatial or functional boundaries surrounding particular ecosystems and their context. So some of the seminal thinkers in this area are Carl Folk, Friedrich Birks, Johann Rockström, the planetary boundaries guy, and Halling, C.S. Halling. So you get this idea that, one, diagram that I found on the internet was basically looking at how the human and ecosystems are interacting and how ecosystem services. This was back in the 2000s. You might remember something called the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, and they really were the pioneers of this idea that, or they promoted heavily the idea that ecosystems provide not only provisioning services like water and food, but also cultural services, like you might have a part of the forest that's sacred and nobody can cut it because it has sacred trees there. Also recreational services in the West, we depend a lot on those, and we look forward to getting out on the weekend on a lake or a river. So these feed the human system, and then there's actions that affect the ecosystem services. On the other side, we have another diagram, and you could probably find hundreds of these diagrams on the internet describing the complex interrelations between humans and the environment, right? So yesterday we talked about demography. We touched on a little bit livelihood type issues, and we'll talk more about livelihoods as we move on. We talked about the 5 capitals that people have in livelihoods. And then we, talk a little bit more about climate processes, but the kind of climate might be considered an external driver of these ecological processes. And then you have the integration of the two in the middle. I mentioned yesterday some of my work, or maybe this morning, I'm sorry, the days are starting to blend together a little bit, but this larger diagram that was part of my thesis, the PhD dissertation thesis, which is the SUST vulnerability framework. And it really came out of earlier, frameworks like pressure and release, risk hazard frameworks. And what it sought to include and then add to it were issues of entitlements, the legal and customary rights to exercise command over food and other resources, coping capacities such as defense mechanisms against hazards such as diversification of your crops or diversification of income sources, and finally resilience, which we covered more in depth yesterday. And it has some key characteristics which you can read for yourself over here. But the idea is, on the left-hand side, you've got the hazard or perturbation, much like in the IPCC stress framework, the hazard comes in. There are different characteristics and components related to the exposure. So you might have different population characteristics, different economic systems that are like agriculture or industry or fisheries that are exposed here. Then the sensitivity of that system to the perturbation, the stressor, and finally the resilience, which is the coping and response, the impact response, and the adjustment and adaptation response, which basically means after the experience, you might learn something from that experience and start adopting new approaches or technologies to try to avert those kinds of system responses in the future. And then finally, you have coming back sort of different, well, on the outer rings, you basically have different scales. So in this inner blue ring, you have place, which is the locality that you're concerned about. The next might be the country or region it's embedded in. And the final one is the world. And it's not like we can look at places entirely in isolation. So there are influences and there's factors coming from outside, whether it's political or economic disruptions. You can think of the 2008 financial crash being a disruption that comes in, maybe as another type of stressor, and affects the system. So it's very complicated. Obviously, I found that one of the beauty of this is it really tries to unpack those socio-ecological systems in ways that are useful for research. The difficulty, frankly, is that if you try to model this and quantify it in some way, it becomes almost impossibly what we call irreducibly complex. It's just so hard to get all these connections right. But I'll say that integrated assessment models is one approach that people are taking to try to integrate, the climate and environmental factors, the social factors, and the economy in an integrated way. All right, so this part is pretty important, and I reduced it to one slide, but you could, I'd recommend, if you want to look into this more, there's an introduction to systems thinking by this Dr. Kim, and he juxtaposes system thinking with analytical thinking. And basically, he says, we could do with a lot more system thinking because we live in a world where we're trying to act in certain ways and maybe trying to change things. So we'll be talking more about transformative change in the next couple of days and thinking about what policies might be put in place. You cannot design policies without understanding how the system works, okay? So what are some characteristics of thinking? Well, systems. Let me just first read the quote. In the most basic sense, a system is any group of interacting, interrelated, or interdependent parts that form a complex and unified whole that has a specific purpose. The key thing to remember is that all the parts are interrelated and interdependent in some way. Without such interdependencies, we have just a collection of parts, not a system. So he kind of talks about the difference between a toolbox, which has wrenches and it has pliers and it has screwdrivers and other things in a toolbox. They're just a collection of parts, right? If you take one part out, you take the screwdriver out, it's still a toolbox, and it's still basically, is a repository for all those individual pieces or tools. But if you take one piece out of a system, like if you take the fuel pump out of an automobile, it's not going to work anymore. That's a classic system. And there are differences. We'll talk a little bit about, essentially there's differences between hardwired systems like cars, washing machines, production lines in an industry where everybody's assembling things. That's a very hardwired system, and basically it's very fit for purpose. And the purpose is one thing. So the key thing to remember is that systems actually have purposes, that there's a reason why the system is in place. And that's true of social systems as it is true of the automobile or the washing machine or whatever else. The assembly line, they have a purpose. The assembly line, it's to manufacture a good that's going to be purchased by people out there. All parts are necessary. Removing any of the parts will largely or could seriously affect its functioning. The order of the parts affects the functioning. So in a production line, you have certain things that need to take place first before you get to other later parts of the production. But similarly, you need to put pieces of a car together in a certain order, and they need to be linked in certain ways to be able to drive the car successfully. One thing that's important is that systems maintain their stability through feedbacks. So on your dashboard in your car, you have some feedback mechanisms. You might see, you might see a temperature gauge. If the temperature gauge is going too high, that suggests that you might need to stop, refill the radiator, or get some new antifreeze or something of that sort. If you in other systems, they're self-regulating, like biological systems. Your body temperature goes up when you're infected. The systems for protecting yourself from infection start kicking in. More white blood cells are produced or whatever. And I'm not a biologist and I'm not a medical scientist. So do not take any of my, but the example is essentially that our bodies are self-regulating systems as well. And so information is essentially processed in the system, and it results in feedbacks. So we know that in cars and other things, the system is hardwired. In natural and social systems, the purpose can actually change over time. So there can be evolution in the systems. Our lack of understanding of the system purpose may result in interventions with unintended consequences. Causal modeling is a tool to communicate assumptions about a system. So the example I gave yesterday is probably a good one. So during COVID, I was thinking a lot about systemic racism. I mentioned I read a book called Caste, and the book basically compared the U.S. System of racial segregation and the caste system in India, and it drew some very interesting comparisons. But as I read more deeply on the aspects of systemic racism, one thing that kind of illustrated this point is that when in the South of the U.S., where slavery was most prevalent, when the North imposed upon it the requirement that everybody be able to get educated, what the white population did was essentially, and so this was basically a federal mandate, you must allow former slaves into your classrooms. Well, you can imagine that was a huge shock for many white slave owners to think that their kids would be in the same classroom as the former slaves. And so the system was built to maintain a certain class hierarchy. That was the way the system functioned. And by imposing a law on it that said everybody will be together in the same classroom, that violated one of the basic tenets in the South of the United States. And so the result was in this unintended consequence that basically the whites all fled to private schools, many of them unfortunately Christian schools, because they thought of themselves as Christian and moral and educated. And so they went to the private schools, leaving the public schools impoverished and generally with many fewer resources. So, that's an example. You could look at many other, we all know in our heads maybe a few examples of where someone put a well-intended policy in place. In Mexico, for a while, they wanted to reduce air pollution. So they basically said, if your number plate ends in a positive number or odd or even number, you'll be able to drive on a given day. Well, what did wealthy people do? They bought two cars and registered one car with an odd numbered plate and another one with an even numbered plate so that they could drive every day of the week. So, people find ways around the policies. And you need then to say, why in Mexico City didn't people, obey the law and do the right thing? Well, the basic problem was the wealthy didn't trust public transportation systems, or they didn't feel safe on them, or whatever. So you would have to address that root cause before you actually get people to, all jump on the subway and start riding around or the metro in the city. Is that the case here in Delhi? I wonder, is there a class division among who rides the metro and who doesn't? Not so much. I see some nods. I see some no. Actually, it's a pretty nice system from what I understand. It's new, right? Newly constructed. So one of the things that we can also see is, from events like the COVID pandemic, massive shock to the system, then you can see patterns of what happens in that event, which reveals underlying systemic structures. So I really do commend to you, if you want to be more effective in thinking systemically, to read this brief primer. It's only like 20 pages long. And take a look at what some of the thinking is that goes into systems thinking. This is an example of a causal diagram. It's another tool that I can recommend to you. It's called Kumu. And I'm not going to use Kumu today because it's a little too complicated for a brief lab to describe how to go about working with the interface. But within a half a day, you can become very effective in using Kumu. And Kumu basically allows you to create these system feedback diagrams. I actually learned about these way back in undergraduate days because I studied with someone who was really one of the fathers of system dynamic modeling. So the system dynamics was used in the global, what they called the world model back in the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome developed the world model, and basically system dynamics was at the basis of that. And system dynamic modeling basically takes various elements and relates them to one another through causal loops. So if temperature goes up, crop production will go down, therefore the negative here. If crop production goes down, subsistent production will go down. So it's positively related. This goes down, that goes down. Also, commercial production will go down. Presumably, household income would go down. And part of what, and then I looked at agricultural laboring, so maybe going elsewhere to work for, if your household income declines, you would then want to go to agricultural labor elsewhere or non-farm employment in the city or a local town. There might be other shocks to household income, such as international commodity prices, which results in increased food imports, resulting potentially in increased food supply. And some of the commercial production might go into the food supply, resulting in increased food supply and decreasing food prices. And then I had a whole thing about where people might leave rural areas and go from rural to urban areas. So as household income increases, you would expect rural to urban migration to decrease. But if it decreases over here, then you would see rural to urban migration increasing with more rural migrants to the city and more urban population and therefore more food demand over here. It wasn't a perfect effort, but it was a first attempt for me to kind of sketch out a hypothesis I had. And the hypothesis that I have, which relates mostly to Africa, but it may have some bearing in India, is that basically as young people and youth in many developing countries are experiencing and seeing the impacts of climate change on crop production, they may question the viability of a future in agriculture for their food security and for their livelihoods. And therefore, they may exit, in a sense, the rural system, the rural productive system, and move to urban areas. And then you have questions about whether external food supplies and dependence on those food supplies may make the country more vulnerable to food shocks in the future. Now, there are many more and better experts on the subject. I have some colleagues at Columbia who look at this question, which is a really critical question, of how do food supplies, food trade, how does food trade basically compensate and how can countries become vulnerable? It turns out in Africa, roughly 80% of the population is involved in agriculture. Can you guess what percentage of food is derived from imports in Africa? Any guesses? Just you can throw it out. Yes. Yeah, they have limited technology, so they don't produce a lot themselves. So what percentage of their food consumption comes from imports, like basic staples? 60 to 70%, yeah. Turns out it's almost 80%. So it's almost roughly the same as the percent in agriculture. So if you are in a country of Africa, your agricultural labor force is declining. Your food production, therefore, could potentially decline. Not guaranteed. Maybe technology will substitute for labor and you'll get a perfect equilibrium somehow. But in many parts of Africa, as you know, the technologies are very low. So you might be reducing your food production on the one hand, but also increasing your dependence on imports on the other. And one question, that arises from this is food security in urban areas. And one thing I know is that policymakers, and particularly urban policymakers, will do anything to try to preserve the peace in the urban area because they don't want there to be riots in the street because of food prices and things like that. We saw what happened with the Arab Spring. We saw what happened in some other countries when food prices went up. It's not a pretty picture. So they'll do a lot. And they might even further undermine the agricultural sector over here by maintaining crop prices to a certain level. Like they might just limit limit the rise in crop pricing. Anyway, that was my attempt to sort of sketch out a hypothesis that I have about climate, food security, and rural urban and migration. But what we ended up working with instead was this causal diagram and framework. And I'm not going to talk about it at length because I really want to get into our exercise today. But this is published in Population Environment, and I worked with the postdoc I mentioned earlier today, Cascade Tucholsky. It happens he's an expert in urban in heat and heat stress, but he also has done some work on food security. And I said, you know, Cascade, I've seen a lot of literature in the climate mobility space that says that statistically relates some change in a parameter over here, temperature or rainfall, maybe some crop data, but generally no, it's just crop temperature and rainfall over here, and some kind of mobility response, migration over here. And some of them are quite sophisticated. I'm not denying that they have validity, but what they leave out is everything in between, okay? The household, the food system, how are food prices arrived at, and the production of food within that system, and domestically and internationally, and then the way the household is organized in the rural livelihoods. So both household level and general livelihood systems. These are things that would take longitudinal studies, meaning over time, of both climate factors and the food production system, and ultimately migration, to be able to start teasing out exactly how these things interact. So that was the purpose of our article, just to say that we need to know more about what's going on in the middle here. All right, so conceptual models. I already quoted part of this earlier about what conceptual models do, but they build bridges across different disciplines by requiring researchers to integrate diverse basic assumptions, frameworks, methods, and languages. So it's essentially a great tool for interdisciplinary discussion. I encourage you during your breakouts to really think about like who's in your group. Maybe write down on the side, write down something about who is represented in your group. Are you all physical scientists, or is there a mix of social and physical scientists, et cetera? So maybe just make a note of that, because I'd be curious. And then what you want to do is kind of tease out the links between climate change, some kind of event that's destructive, like floods and sea level rise, destruction of land and housing, and ultimately migration, but also what some of the other responses might be. This I showed you in the Google Doc, so you already saw these things, but it basically teases out. I don't think this is particularly useful, so you can just ignore this part over here. You don't have to put climate change on your left-hand side. And I'll make a note in a moment about something, but this then causes things like tropical cyclones and intense precipitation events. These in and of themselves are not the hazard. The hazard comes when it actually interacts with the system, in this case, landslides in mountainous areas or floods in low-lying areas. And so this is not the hazard. It's just basically the climate parameter that happens, the change, the anomaly. And then finally over here you have the direct effects of the flood, riverbank erosion, damage to crops and livestock, injuries, fatalities, stagnant water and sewage, which over on the bottom leads to things like diseases, which then can lead to more fatalities, fewer work opportunities, reduced income, reduced food availability, loss of land. And then this will lead to adaptation options, which may or may not include migration. So we don't want to ignore the fact that maybe migration really is not the best adaptation strategy for this particular risk. And this is another example of glacial loss and ice sheet, thermal expansion of oceans, ice sheets resulting in sea level rise, which then results in, and there are all these other things that go into sea level rise. I mentioned yesterday, it's not just about ice sheets melting. But then you have relative sea level rise, increasing flood risk in the coastal zone, erosion, land loss, inundation, which then results in things that matter to humans, like damage to infrastructure, loss income, et cetera. And then finally, there are different adaptation responses. What I would like to do differently in our exercises, I would like you to actually, based on the readings you did, elucidate a few of the adaptation options beyond just saying people migrate out. Okay, so there may be other adaptation options that are common in the case studies that you looked at. Here's a causal diagram that I put together just for a study we did on the Caribbean, and I was trying to get my head around how we would go about conducting a literature review, and so I started the literature review, and then I started looking at some of the major issues in this region, and basically you've got extremes in precipitation leading to drought, coastal flooding, and inland flooding, and then each of these is tied to a range of other things. I was going to originally, when I designed this exercise, we did it in what was that Google tool Jamboard, and Jamboard was decommissioned, and now you need to get licenses for other tools, and I just found that in the end of the day, you can do this effectively in a spreadsheet, but you might need to add a lot of rows. So don't be afraid to add rows and to rearrange things according to the way they're linked to each other. And if you have to repeat something like drought multiple times, it's okay. You can repeat it in the spreadsheet, in different locations in the spreadsheet as it links to different things. But ultimately, big issues in the Caribbean region are impacts on the tourism sector and in the import dependency that I mentioned earlier, the fact that most of their food is imported and not produced locally. Anyway, additional effects of floods and sea level rise on the side are always the result of the interaction of the local social and economic system, thus the level of individual. So these are the demographic factors we covered yesterday. They're very important. What I'd like you to do in your spreadsheet is I'd like you to put all the vulnerability, the differential vulnerability things that you observed in the studies up in the upper right. So I'll put a little space there. I'll go into the spreadsheets as you're editing them in your groups. And in the upper right, you can start listing some of the differential vulnerabilities you observed from the case studies that you read. So there may be other human impacts like impervious surfaces that exacerbate things like flooding, or dams can trap sediments and maybe even result in overtopping or eventually collapse of dams that could create other vulnerabilities. So you can look at those as well. Here's the things to diagram, and this is sort of beginning to get into the step-by-step. Put your climate factors on the far left, put your climate impact next, put your direct effects in the next column, your indirect effects, list as many adaptation responses you can think of, draw arrows between items. There are no arrows in spreadsheets, although I think you might be able to draw in Google Sheets. I'm not sure if you can put arrows. Can you add arrows in a Google Sheet? I don't know. You can play with that. If you can actually put arrows between cells, that would be a good thing. I haven't tried annotating in that way. And then consider the following questions. What are the causal processes? Were patterns of mobility different for different groups of people? What are the determining factors in people moving or staying? What might things on the right, how might things on the right side of the diagram feed back to things on the left side of your diagram? And these slides, by the way, are already in the slides, the lectures folder that I sent around earlier. So once you go in there, you can look for T01. So if you want to be reminded of what's in the slide deck, you can just pull up that slide deck on your laptop. I'm hoping that you all brought your laptops with you, but if you need to go and get them from your rooms, you can go. We'll take a brief break to make sure you all can get them. And then this is an example of one that I just started. It's not fully cooked, but you can see some of the same approach as was described. Again, this is on the Google Drive, so you don't have to take a picture of it, but basically, you can see on the right some of the mobility responses, and you can see other adaptation actions that might be taken to avert things like food insecurity. So this is kind of how to do this in a non-diagrammetric way. I guess I could have used Microsoft. I think they have Microsoft Projects has some pretty useful tools, but I haven't used them yet. So remember that while we are starting from the climate change on the left-hand side, social vulnerabilities are pre-existing and historically constructed and critical for understanding. So it's really like when you talk about the vulnerabilities in the upper right-hand side of the diagram, just remember to put in any like underlying power structures or other pre-existing vulnerabilities that may exist in addition to the kind of differential vulnerabilities in the groups that you're looking at, like farmers or fisher folk. Um, so you have some time to work on your sheet together. Each of you is signed up to be in a particular group. I guess what I'm going to propose is we start with group 1 here, group 2 in the middle, group 3 in the far back, group 4 in the far back there, group 5 in the middle here, and group 6 here. And you can move your chairs around in a circle so that you're actually kind of facing each other. Some of your groups are much bigger than others. I noticed the coastal fishing group has fewer participants. So, you might be able to move also into another room if it gets too loud in here. It's whatever you choose to do. Take about 45 minutes to go through, and basically try to flesh out your diagram. Choose immediately. Maybe the last person on your list could be the facilitator, and the first person the rapporteur. Or if you have someone who's particularly senior and or outspoken or volunteers to be the facilitator, feel free to do it that way. But just make sure that everyone has a chance to contribute, right? Don't, I see already in this a sort of gender divisions occurring in this group, and I want to encourage gender cooperation. And so we get, men and women working together and everyone on the same plane contributing. And senior and junior people all working together and contributing on the same plane. Use the material from the 2 readings. You can also, if you have happened to know about a case study from another part of India or some other part of the world that you've studied or you know about, bring that information in. That's perfectly acceptable. It would be nice to know about those cases. Please note at the top right of the diagram any differential vulnerabilities, and I'll write a place for that in a moment in each of those sheets. And you'll have about 45 to 50 minutes. Then in plenary, we'll come back and you'll present your results, and we'll hear from each of your groups, and then we'll have a chance to discuss anything useful that came out of this. Keep in mind this idea of system thinking in what might be some of the underlying system dynamics within the particular archetypes that we're seeing, whether it's fisher people in coastal zones or, people working in smallholder agriculture in dryland areas of India or Africa. So with that, I think I'll stop. Again, it's group 1 in the middle there, group 2, group 3 in the far back, 4, 5, and 6. And hopefully you remember which group you signed up for. It's in the spreadsheet that's on the Google Drive. Yeah. Okay. So there's a spreadsheet on the drive. You'll notice there's tabs for each of the groups. So at the bottom, you can find the tab for the drylands, for the coastal, for mountain areas, etc. Does that make sense?
Actually, about putting the inputs there on that factors, flooding and other. So show that tab, no?
Can you bring up the drive?
Yes, sure. Actually, individuals should put their groups should have their own conceptual mapping table.
Yeah, each.
Spreadsheet, no? Google Drive is in this spreadsheet. Not this one.
Yeah. So in the spreadsheet, you'll find it. If you click on the link to the spreadsheet, which is down here, where is it? At the top of this, just before this, right here, that one. Go to that. Which group is this? Six? And you guys are dealing with, oh, well, it's indigenous communities. If you want to bring in indigenous communities, that's fine. If you think you have some examples of how the castles. Yeah, okay. So you can mix it a bit.
So is it necessary that we would be bringing the indigenous community and others because there are climate vulnerable communities other than
No, there are indigenous communities that are vulnerable in climate, but they are not yet aware of the fact that they can move to other places. Like they're not that
They're
much.
not moving.
Yeah.
So what are
They are
the
not
what are the
privileged enough to find another place to like settle in. Just like the case of Alaska, because they can't leave their culture behind and shift to a new
But
place.
in Alaska, they're actually doing a planned relocation of more communities. So they're actually moving them out of the.
In the reading the two communities, they are actually doing this. They are opted for it.
Okay. But there are other adaptation strategies too for some other indigenous communities, I understand. And maybe they're so tied, what we call rooted in place because of their culture.
so this
Yeah, so what is it?
group there are tabs for
Yeah.
each group and the people from that particular they will fill their own respective.
Do it collectively. Everybody together. So when you're in your group, you're going to be working together to fill in the tab that you are assigned. So drylands, highlands, urban slums, etc. So hopefully that's clear. When I said in the upper right, I'll try to write in there, but basically just make a note of any vulnerabilities, systemic, and we'll make a note of any vulnerabilities that exist, some of which may be more systemic, like political exclusion or things of that sort. And so feel free to get started. I'm here in the room. If you have questions, just reach out to me.
Actually, I'm busy with that because some of the participants do not have access to. I am giving access to them. The,
Okay,
yeah,
feel
yeah.
free to do
Yeah, yeah.
whatever you have to do.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. You already did.
If you don't have access to the document, come over here and talk to
It's Reza, I would say.
Reza.
They are not interrupted.
That's good. What things are you looking for?
So actually, we have prepared the variable table in our system, but we need to put it here in the Excel sheet you have provided.
Ideally, I mean, this is if this is your own approach to doing it, that's fine. It looks like you have most of the elements here.
Yes, or we have connected it for migration theory also based on the paper element.
Okay, well, if you want to focus more on the two questions I have at the top, what are the differential vulnerabilities that are evident, the vulnerabilities that are evident, and social vulnerabilities, and then what are some of the systemic elements that you might have seen? What's your particular area again? Violence, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think this is fine if you want to keep it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it okay?
Actually, yeah, actually, we are having two papers, okay? Case studies in
Yeah.
dry land.
Okay.
है ना?
First is Whitaker and the other one.
After the
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, what I had hoped, but maybe it wasn't clear, was that you would try to integrate both in a sense.
Okay,
But, you
both.
know,
If you want to do
what
it
you're trying to do
separately.
is generate broader, like these
Okay,
are
okay,
called
okay.
archetypes for a reason. It's not because one is in India and one is in Africa.
Okay, okay, okay.
The broader archetype
You
is
can use both.
dryland. So you might think about how the two of your groups can work together.
Okay, okay.
All right. Let me just make that point to everybody. Okay. Just so everybody's aware, there's inevitably going to be some misinterpretation, and this is fine. So this group basically took the two separate articles and worked in two separate groups. My original intent was that your group would work all together and generate one, because these are archetypes in the sense that it doesn't matter if the case study is in Peru or in India or Africa. There should be some overarching patterns that you see that recur that would be evident in both case studies to some degree. Does that make sense? But I will say this: since we started at 3, we have about 20 more minutes, roughly. So if you can take the last part of your time together, and if you were working in two separate groups with one group working on one article and one group working in the other, and go ahead and use that spreadsheet, which is now no longer up there, but the spreadsheet, the Google sheet, then maybe you can generate a few overarching kind of commonalities that exist among the case studies. Does that make sense? Okay, thanks.
But then they have also, but then they have also closed the portal.
So there's a doubt. Basically, we are doing on the tribal community of the Sami tribe of Scandinavia. So the thing is that, sir, should we mention the policy implication of like government policies, how they affected their cultural tradition? Because it is mentioned in the article.
You could do that by systemic issues on the top right.
Where should we add this?
You could, I mean, if you want to mention, or anywhere on the sheet, if you want to add that there are policies that are relevant to the case, that's fine. You could put it
Okay, we can do it in the later part.
Yeah, there you go. That sounds right.
So, if you're talking about mitigation, would it fall within the climate action? Will we put it under the climate action tab, or like?
No, my first doubt is, are both of them same?
Okay, which one?
So these
These
two.
these two columns, like adaptation actions and adaptation
You can
actions.
put mitigation actions if you want.
Okay.
Actions, yeah.
Okay. So we'll put mitigation actions here.
Okay.
And
So,
Yoda.
Professor, I'm asking if so the communities in Alaska are now ensuring that through monitoring and by the data that is collected, they can present it to the agencies which would fund them, uh, fund the process of looking at how things are happening there, and then maybe if they're not moving out, they'll be more they'll be aware about okay how things are changing in the region. So that's one of the adaptation strategy, that okay we will have devices to monitor sea level change, soil erosion.
Perfect. That's perfect.
So would it be part of adaptation or mitigation?
Well, that would be part of adaptation.
Yeah.
Mitigation in the climate realm talks about greenhouse gas reduction.
Okay, yeah,
But
mitigation.
mitigation in the hazard risk realm represents doing things to reduce your exposure.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So you could say it's hazard risk mitigation if you want.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
This is overall implementing or this is the effect of that incident?
प्राइवेट हो गया और पब्लिक हो गया, खासगी पे हो, पर्सनल हो गया, प्राइवेट हो गया, पब्लिक भी कर सकते हैं, जैसे कि हॉस्पिटल हो गया, जो भी हो, हॉस्पिटल और भी
Okay, let's take the next 3 to 4 minutes to wrap up your discussions, and then we'll start the report outs, if that's okay. Okay, are we ready to reconvene? Awesome. So I will ask our AV tech to come back and set up so that we can look at each of the slide decks. So, yeah, just a moment. Where's the guy? Where's? You're still locked.
One of my group member was representing from the parameters that we have given, but this is what I'm trying to treat it as a sort of Indian context, as a case study which I'm going on myself. This is a localized community which I treat as a sort of ethnography. So I have all these things. So if you just click, these are the chart. You want to see it like combined with this or like after this. So then I will.
Let's see if there's time.
Okay, so if this six groups, so it's like if you want, I can just present in 5 minutes, the very brief, giving the idea how climate change affects the communities. I'll give it. I present one by one the assessment of each group through the that would be better because I need to include all the groups. Yeah, sir. They already few people have completed the data. Did you do your assessment? Did you shoot? Yes, so did you all the assessment in the sheets? Yeah, I am recommending.
All right. Well, all right. Let's start with the Drylands group. If you guys want to send a delegate up to present, the I'd like a little sense. Maybe you could talk about also the diversity of perspectives in your group. So maybe disciplinary diversity, if there is some diversity. So who's going to be presenting the groups? You have a rapporteur selected. I noticed two of the groups might have done theirs in a different spreadsheet. I don't know where your spreadsheet is. The last two groups, so groups 5 and 6, yours is not in this collective Google sheet. So I don't know if you can put it in there or you want to give it to be projected from the main projector. Okay. What's that? Okay, 2 volunteers, fine. Okay, who wants to do? Okay. Nazarene, you're going to. Okay, folks, you each have about 5 minutes to present. I'll let you go over to 6 minutes. I'll be keeping time, so if you hit 5 minutes, I'll say 1 minute. I'll just shout out 1 minute, and you have another minute to basically present your results. I want to do that out of respect for everyone because I know that you all have a lot of content to present. So, Nazreen, over to you.
Hi. Thank you so much, sir.
Hello, folks in the back. If you can turn your attention to the front of the room now. We're all doing a plenary session. All right. Our indigenous group is rebelling here and they're doing their own thing. All right. And, these don't have to be perfect presentations. We want to stimulate discussion. That's the main thing. Okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Myself, Dr. Nazreen. Our group was the first group for the dryland studies based on two research papers. First was for Wheatkar 2018 and second one for the Pradhan. Our group divided into two parts. Of first half we prepared the table using the first paper of the Wheatkar. I will brief the paper first. Wheatkar 2018. What are the methodology they used, and what are the their adaptation methods and strategies. Okay, let's start now. Uh,
Yeah, maybe you should step up to the front and use what you have on the screen to walk people through what's on the screen,
okay,
if that's okay. So do you want
can
to
I go there?
go to the right to the front?
Okay, so
Go up to the screen and you can point it.
okay. So, our first in the first paper, Whitaker 2018, these are the climate factors adapted. Too little rainfall, drought, and the climate impact was drought, and for that direct effect was crop failure, livestock losses, water scarcity, and the other for the climate factor, delayed monsoon and gap in rainy season, or the impact and hazard with that came extended dry period due to irregular rainfall, and with that came the direct effect, lower agriculture productivity, food insecurity, and from that the indirect effect came from both the causes, crop insurance, imperfect credit market, and the others are like high temperature, heat, humidity, long term increase in temperature, and the last intense but infrequent rainfall. And the climate impact we noticed in the Wheatkar paper, like heat wave leading to increased evaporation, desertification, soil degradation, flash floods, and soil erosion. And the direct effect were identified from that paper reading: livelihood stress, reduced crop yields, labor intense inefficiency, then declining land fertility, reduced yields, economic pressure on smallholders, and the last but not the least, destruction of crops, infrastructure damage, families structure, the change of family structure due to the phenomena caused in the climate factor and climate impact hazard. Crop area in agriculture, they change a lot. Government welfare programs introduced. Okay, now here comes the indirect effect from climate factor and hazards. Loss of income, physical and financial assets, dependency ratio, and the climate adaptation responses we noticed in the paper one, Whitaker 2018. The adaptation actions were mainly based on the migration theories. They came of the migration. They think of the migration of its solution. Or other paper, it is not thinking of the migration. They somehow they adapt. My colleague will explain well about this second paper. So adaptation actions: crop management, livestock management, soil and water management, income diversification, change in food production system, so social networking, religious activities, humanitarian aid, information, sale of property. uh, some of the points are in the slides which are not showing here. Seasonal or permanent migration, which is based on the Whitaker paper. Yeah, thank you. Temporary migration, shifting to non-farm income opportunities, reduction in agricultural activities, migration of working age men. They think of migration of the working age men, out migration from marginal land, particularly among youth. It was a trend noticed in that paper. This was based on the household survey. relocation, emergency migration, or shifting livelihood strategies. So finding of the first paper was they think of not adjusting with the environment and thinking of adapting some local adaptation plan. They think of unknowingly they were doing the migration in form of push and pull. They were associated with the theories of migration, pull and push theory, NLIM, etc. Thank you. And the other half will explain my colleague.
Second paper is based on weather variations and temporary migrations. It focused on investigating weather variations along with the socio-economic factor determine the temporary migrations. In second papers, there is not any weather elements. They have used proxy variables as crop yield and some data based on empiricals based on Telangana and Maharashtra districts. About 2015 samples were collected. They use variables like family structure, householding, cultivation pattern, physical and financial asset, household production and consumptions, main occupations of the family, age of head of household, year of educations. Some interesting findings of these papers are it shows non-linear relations with educations that shows U-step relations like migrations and year of education of head of household. The households with higher level of education, they are more likely to migrate, temporary migrations, and households having different source of incomes, generally non-farm source of income, non-farming, they are more pretend or more likely to migrate, and probability of migration decreases with repetitive to householdings on such, and individuals who live village are less likely to weak during uh, if they have less land holdings, they are not likely to move rather than people household having more household land holdings. They are more like they are less likely to for temporary migrations. And in final, we can say that it is not one factor that influencing the temporary migrations, but there are different factors: educations, land holdings, source of incomes, and different family decisions also influencing the temporary migrations. Thank you.
Thank you both. You were both sort of early presenters, and so I'm going to just move to ask that this is not be a summary of the results of a research study, but rather an effort to synthesize results across a few different studies to look at how climate factors engender these direct and indirect impacts on livelihoods, and then might result in different types of adaptation actions. So I appreciate the effort of the first group. Let's go to the second group and bring up the Highlands diagram. Again, I realize there's a lot of richness in the individual studies. We're having to, in the interest of time, hello, indigenous people, rebellious indigenous people. We're in the interest of time, we have to gloss over a lot of the particularities of what's going on in each case, because what we're getting at, we're trying to sort of Plato talked about ideal types or archetypes. So what are some of the main dynamics occurring in this case? mountainous areas and highlands of the global south. Over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Good afternoon, dear audience. I am presenting the combined activity of Group 2. We are a group of dynamic 10 scholars, and we have come up with something. Bear with me. The Group 2, we were designated an activity which case study which typically read as highland mountainous area in which a combination of wage labor for export crops, example coffee or tea, and small holder agriculture production organized by household units are the main livelihood activities, possibly or particularly in the case of Central America, South America, or Africa. We were given two good reads for, as the case studies. First was Milan and Ruano 2013 on Guatemala, and the other one was Adams 2016 on Peru. So I won't elaborate these reads or either the topic for it, but I'll begin with our finding and focus on our work, which we've done as a group in the past half an hour or more. So when it comes to highland or mountainous areas, it's we were given this well tabulated form which had climatic which had three effects, which was climate effects, societal effects, and the other was the, can you please the responses, right? So in the climatic effects, usually they were first the factors. Basically, in the three broad subheads, we are dealing with the cause and effect in every aspect. So first, in the climatic factor, in the subhead of in the heading of climate, there's a subhead of climatic factor and its impact. Similarly, in societal effects, there's the direct effect and indirect effect. And henceforth for the responses, which I'll come later on. First, I will elaborate about the climate. So first, in the climatic factors, since hilly areas or highland mountainous regions are of very fragile topography, it's ecologically very sensitive zone, and these are one of the most fragile ecologies after probably the coral reefs, which we study in the environmental studies. So after that, the most fragile ecology happens to be the mountainous region, because there are various factors which come into play. In the mountainous regions or highlands across the world, the climatic factors, firstly, there are geomorphic factors, which is the gradient, steep land, and then there is tectonic activity taking place. So there is isostatic imbalance, which is very prevalent in such ecologies, particularly the mountainous regions. And the climatic factor which come into play is, first one was fragile topography, which is steep gradient, which I just spoke about. And the next was extreme rainfall. In hilly areas, we have seen this orogenic rainfall phenomena which occurs. So in that, when there is an extreme rainfall and there is a steep gradient or very yeah, when there's a steep gradient, so the flow of rainfall is, you know, downstream flow of rainfall. And when it's downstream flow of rainfall, in mathematics and in earlier classes we studied that upstream, the downstream effect is twice as the upstream going effect. So when there is a gush of rainfall downstream, so the intensity of rainfall, whatever it is, in the induced by the orogenic activity in the mountains, but the downstream, if this gradient makes it even more intense, with which the rainfall just gushes out. And then there's glacial lake outburst, floods, GLOF phenomenon happening, because in the era of climate change and global warming, what we find out is that there's due to rising extreme temperatures, which is another. So all of these factors are amalgamation or correlated with each other. So I can't talk about one factor in totality, because all of them are come under the umbrella of the other one. So that is the beauty, or you can say, about of the climate change phenomenon. So rising temperatures leads to melting of glaciers, which causes the GLOF phenomenon. And as I spoke about the isostatic imbalance, so for, lots of folding and faulting keeps occurring in tectonic activities, because plate disturbances that leads to earthquake. And the final one is water stress. So yes, I want to elaborate that one. Coming to the climatic impact, out of these phenomenon which I just spoke about, these have direct impact on the fragile ecology. So coming to the impact, there is landslides or avalanches depending on the topography, what kind of mountain we are dealing with, whether it's a snow-clad mountain, whether it's a Himalayan mountain or high altitude areas, or Urals, or somewhere in the Europe. There are flash floods coming to the climatic impact. That is another hazard which takes place. Extreme rainfall or above normal rainfall leads to flash floods, as we saw in the Kedarnath tragedy of Uttarakhand in 2013. There was a cloud burst which led to flash floods into the entire temple or religious tourism area. Again, the isostatic imbalance leads to ground subsidence, high soil mass movement and erosion. There are forest fires and faulting taking place. Now I'll come to the societal effects. So when these things come in, these factors come into play, which are climatic, come geomorphic, come geological, and combined together, we come to the direct impact of it, which is the societal effects. So there are some of them are direct, and the others are indirect. Coming to the direct societal effects, it's loss of human settlements, which is very obvious, loss of infrastructure, fatalities, reduced water supply, wherever there is something terrace farming or beverages are grown usually in the mountainous regions like tea, and so there is crop failure, land subsidence, again, loss of life and injuries, damage to property and crops, forest destruction, eventually leading to more than air pollution. I suppose there is soil pollution taking place, because there's all the contamination of the soil takes place after this destruction. Just as in the case of the aftermath of tsunami, we see there's a complete destruction of land area. Similarly, if there is any natural or man-made hazard in the mountainous regions, the aftermath visuals are horrifying. So I would like to correct it here. Rather than air pollution, we'll talk about soil pollution and land contamination. And loss of biodiversity. Obviously, the ecological balance completely disrupts in the mountainous ecologies. And there's loss of, I'd like to add here, there's loss of habitat also. So because of complete destruction. Indirect impact happens with displacement of communities, particularly the tribal indigenous people residing in the mountainous regions. Economic loss, very obvious. Land degradation. These flash floods and such instances lead to waterborne diseases, long-term homelessness and displacement, food shortages, reduced water availability, complete ecosystem disruption. Coming to more of them, I'd like to add decline in yield wherever there is terrace or subsistence agriculture taking place in the mountainous regions. River sedimentation as obvious.
All right, we'll have to wrap up there. You went over time.
All right.
Too much on the physical side and a little less.
I'll just end on the last.
Please.
I'd lend. I didn't. I wasn't told about the time limit actually. It was, yeah. Okay, sorry. So coming to the last, can you please? Yeah. Coming to the responses, there are adaptation actions and mobility responses. Again, adaptation actions, as I spoke in between, retaining walls, slope stabilization, and in one line, I'd like to, club the adaptation responses is sensitivity amongst humans, and awareness. Awareness about the ecology, the sensitive ecology, which is the mountainous ecology. No over commercialization, industrialization, and tourism-based commercial activities taking place in the mountains. That should be controlled by the masses, by the government, whoever are the stakeholders. Coming to the mobility responses, again, in the mobility responses, we have tunnel systems and all of that, roads which get disrupted. So I can't, I'm up. Thank you so much.
Did a nice job. All right, just to be clear, we do need to get through 4 more groups, and so we'll need each group to limit itself to 6 to 7 minutes maximum. We're going to have to get out of here by 5 p.m. I've been told that that's the absolute limit. So we'll please bring up the urban slums group and have someone, a representative of that group, present the urban slums group.
Good afternoon. I'm here to represent the urban slum group. First of all, I would like to draw your attention that we have been through two articles, and one is from there is three cities: Lagos, Dhaka, and both. Sorry, there is only two cities. So we have identified some climatic factors: extreme high temperature and intense downpour in Lagos, and sea level rise in both the cities, and cyclone in Dhaka. And the climate impact of these climate factors are flooding, storm surge, which can be seen in both the places, riverbank erosion and coastal erosion is seen in Dhaka. After this, Dr. Kaikubad is going to take the lead.
Thank you. In our both the paper, we in group discussion we have concluded that these are the direct social impact and these are the indirect social impact. In indirect social impact, both the cities have observed forced migration, loss of land. And if both the cities have experienced injuries and death. At the same time, livelihood loss, loss of household assets, food scarcity, water scarcity. Both the city case studies have observed that. And after that, the Lagos has only experienced disruption in education as well as housing damage and collapse. Whereas the Dhaka city, the Dhaka case study has a unique forced migration and displacement, loss of land as direct impact of the climate change in Dhaka. And within indirect impacts, both the cities have experienced psychological stress, outbreak of diseases, economic uncertainty, whereas Lagos has only distrust in government. They have found that the local people during the flood, they had distrust in the government, and burden on women and elder were observed in Lagos case study. At the same time, in Dhaka case study, poverty, isolation, social stigma, weak social network, loss of belongingness and social identity, and some early marriage, begging and drug addiction were observed by the group who have studied that paper. And within adaptation action, the second paper does not portray any significant adaptation measure, but in our paper on Logos, we have observed that elevated housing or stilt housing is a flood adaptation measure there. At the same time, construction of sandbag bridges to reduce or to protect from the coastal inundation is one of the major adaptation practices there, and self-organization and local leadership are there for as an adaptation measure for the Logos case study. And these are the some of the responses adaptation action we found out during our discussion with both after reading both the paper, which improved drainage, property rights, risk reduction infrastructure, participatory urban governance, and early warning system, improved health facilities, upgradation of the infrastructure, and participation of the local communities. These are the some of the suggested adaptive measures from both from our group. And at the same time, in both the paper we have observed that the climate change has resulted in these three mobility responses. First is temporary displacement, then relocation to the nearby city, and permanent migration. These are the mobility responses we have observed in both the paper from climate change. Thank you.
Great. So that was a very nice presentation, integrating both studies and emphasizing what was common to both and what was unique to each. Let's go to the coastal group in the back if you want to send a representative to present your results. And I want to just thank the rapporteurs. I know it's a difficult job, so thank you for coming up, for being brave. All right. There we go. If you want to step around.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I am Adrija and I am representing the coastal group. So, our group has English majors, our group has sociologists, our group has social scientists, uh, and mostly geographers. So, before starting, I'll say that we haven't stick to the publications as such, and through our general and scientific knowledge, and also based on some of our field works, we have tried integrating what we have learned from our experiences. Starting with climate factors, what are the climate factors that affects the coastal communities, that affects the coastal areas? Basically, we all know irregular patterns of precipitation, and then sea surface temperature, differential heating or rise in the ocean temperature, increase in the salinity, and obviously the oceanic circulations. Everything combined gives rise to the climate impacts like rising sea level, coastal erosion, soil salinization, increasing storm surge, biodiversity imbalance, and the common factors which you all know, cyclone, flood, and another factor which I want to come into is embankment breach, which is a structural problem. It is not a climatic problem, but I don't know where to keep it, but that's why I have kept it over there. Embankment breach is a major problem in the coastal areas, and the seawater intrusion. So, what is actually happening due to all these problems that are rising? So, what are the social effects or the societal effects that are happening? I uh, the basically we can skip the first part, the rural or urban migration. Tell you about it later. The direct effect is basically resource scarcity. The Because my work is also on climate change induced migration, and whenever I have spoken about migration, most of the people they think that migration is an economic phenomena. But let me tell you this: where does the economic phenomena come from, or where does the economic scarcity come from? The base is resource scarcity. If food insecurity is a problem, then how does food insecurity come into the picture? If seawater intrusion is happening in the agricultural fields, that is where the resource scarcity is happening. If habitat loss is happening, if human animal conflict is a problem, then loss is the major reason for that. Then, coming to that, differential income. Resource scarcity is giving rise to differential income. In coastal cities, there is a, not coastal cities, basically in cities, in urban areas, there is a high income or affluent population, whereas in the coastal areas, due to the resource scarcity or due to the resource degradation, differential income is visible. Differential availability of drinking water. Basically, in coastal regions, from wherever, like if we were talking about Bangalore last week, last day basically, so they were rationing water. So we can always say that urban population will never be under the helm of problems, but whenever it happens in the rural population, we don't have any news about what is happening over there. How are they drinking the water? How are they like actually they are locating the drinking water? And obviously the livelihood loss or the occupation loss. Then the indirect effect is, because of all these problems, the resource scarcity which I have told about, or the occupation loss which I have spoken about, illegal sand mining or several illegal activities are coming into the picture. Increase in the price of fish stock, that is a direct effect of the biodiversity loss. Gender selective and age selective population in uh, the source region, basically, due to the migration that is taking place, and obviously several health issues. Coming to the adaptation actions, the seasonal migration, backup houses. So within this coastal communities also, there is a class dynamic or the economic dynamic that is going on. Some people who are better off, they make their backup houses in the cities. So they generally, whenever there is a flood or there is some cyclone, they move to those places. Then diversification of livelihood, so adaptation, basically we should make our communities in such a way that we should be able to facilitate everyone should have a backup house. And then diversification of livelihood, that comes from the regeneration of the resources. Now, the most important, and I give it a lot of importance, basically integrating cultural communication or impact based early warning system. The early warning systems that we have, do we really care about the people who are most affected? Are they really understanding what type of early warning system are being taken into consideration? Do we really sticking to their understanding? So that's why impact based on cultural communication. Then
Just wrap it up in about 30 seconds.
yeah, sure. So, and communication through social media to express the psychological vulnerability. Basically, the concept of diaspora comes into picture over here. Someone who has migrated, they can talk to the other people who have someone who is thinking of migration can talk to the other people who have migrated, and then they can take the decision of migrating, if at all. And involving indigenous knowledge system and gender inclusivity in policies, basically a bottom up approach in the policies, and the effectiveness of the cyclone shelters and the relief aids. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Good reference to some issues that are perhaps different here around increasing sea surface temperatures. Appreciated the mountain group talking about potential tectonic activity as a result of glacial melt. These are things that are kind of knock-on effects of climate change. Let's go ahead and hear from the Delta group and finally the indigenous group. If we have a moment or two, we'll try to wrap it up. I know we're under time constraints. So come on up. Put in the Delta one. There we go.
Thank you, sir. We have reviewed two papers. One is from the Bangladesh and second one is from the Vietnam. We are the group of 4 research scholars, 5 PG students and 1 working professionals. So here we goes. So in my study into the Vietnam Delta, the migration puts the climatic factor, this is annual cycle flooding. And the climate impact, that is the hazard, is extensive, prolonged inundation, agriculture, land and settlements. And the direct effect is that destruction of the rice crops, submerged homes and livestock mortality. Indirect effect is that depth accumulation, and the adoption actions is that the dike construction that protects the floods and the produce the vulnerability of that particular area. And adaptation actions are season migration to urban centers during flood months, and the Ho Chi Minh shelter that are were produced to shift those cities which are not flooded. And we come to the next climate factor is that is the river bank erosion intensified sand mining. So that leads to the climate impact, the sudden and collapse of the cities, roads and etc. That is the infrastructure main infrastructure of that particular city. So that leads to the direct effect of loss of housing plots. Indirect effect is that fear of collapse, poverty, devolution. That also shows that what are they facing in their minds. So that leads to adaptation action is it government planned resettlement clusters, reprep reinforcement and interest-free loans for new plots, because they are they are forced to borrow from the third party. So adaptation actions are the obligatory relocation of the households to the safer areas. The next one is the saline water intrusion, and the climate impact hazard is that soil salinization brackish water that ultimately led to the crop devastation of that particular area. And if we talk about the direct effect, rice yield decline, aquaculture stock loss and potable water shortages happens. And if we come to talk the indirect effect, rising input costs, fertilizers, salt shortage, and income contraction of that particular household, that particular society, and ultimately leads to the impact into the income of that society.
So the adaptation action is the crop switching. This is the main. We know all that if you shift the crops, so we can produce more crop and boost our income for this particular society. And adaptation actions, that is the exit from farming and move towards the industrialization, working to the industries. And next one is the intensify typhoon tracks that obviously feed the flash floods and related events into that particular area, and it indirectly affected the disrupted markets and devastated the devastation of the economy, that ultimate effect on the livelihood of the that particular society. And the adapted action is the other early warning systems, storm resilience system, as professor has already discussed. Further led will be my research scholar Dr. Siddharth Vermaji. For sir will be continuing the further aspects of my research. Sir.
Thank you so much. Um, so, what I'm going to present is about the mix of our knowledge that we all scholars have gone to the field and observations as what is already written in the textual. So we all know that there is a high precipitation in the study when we talking about the Bangladesh study, and we all know that the tropical cyclones, the intensity and the frequency of the tropical cyclones are increasing day by day and a year in the Asian countries. And with this, we have seen the increase in salinity that affect the livelihood of the people. The salinity goes to the houses as well as the fields where they usually work. And there is a coastal flooding. When there is a coastal flooding, people have to stop their work and they have to rest, or just they go to the mental stress because of the coastal flooding. And when there is a high tide season, they don't go for the fishing because, and that time also they stop their livelihood options. And when we talk about this societal effect, there is a direct impact on the livelihood as well as the all the five assets that written in the like that's social, human, physical, and economic. There is a economic stability, mortality will be there. There's a short-term morbidity, for example, when they go for the cyclone shelters, and there is a waterborne disease, for example, malaria can be there, like the disease which is curable, but for the short-term time period, as well as if we talk about the indirect one, there is a long-term disability. For example, someone is got as for example, during that cyclone, a lady is pregnant. If there is a problem, a health problem, so it can be a long term for it for her. And then there is a neighborhood disruption, communication issues will be there. Then there is a loss of agricultural land, and in the indirect effect, the hamper food supply. They will feel because of the connectivity issues, because there will be a disruption with the land or the water wherever they are living, as well as the biodiversity loss. It could be a fishing. Fishes, they rely on, if they rely on fishing, there's a soil fertility problem, psychosocial impact, which is the most important and the hidden part, where even the Indian government is not taking care of it. After that, if we talk about the adaptation actions, it's a literacy. We have to promote the literacy. They are known, they know their local languages, local traditions, but it is important to literate them professionally so that they can understand the disaster management cycle of particular country. We need a resilient house because we have to make the houses so that every time they cannot migrate, because if you have to stop the migration and develop that area, we have to make the houses like Japan they have made for the for the flood people. As well as there is a lack of awareness. Lack of awareness can be in the terms of communication, can be in the lack of the what to do, how to do, and to whom approach, as well as the policies that the government is giving after the landfalls. We have to focus on the rural, because the rural are the one which are directly get impact from the cyclones. Insurance, that is very important, because the Bangladesh is the similar face the similar cyclone issues with the our Sundarbans and Odisha, Andhra. We have to, and government should give importance to the health, life, agriculture, and house insurance, so that at a very minimum cost, so that it not be an economic burden to their pockets. And if we talk about the adaptation actions, there should be mock drills. They should tell what to do during the mock drills and during the shelters. After that, there should be self-help groups where they can communicate each other and tell the problem, so that there could be a capacity, adaptive capacity for them. Digital awareness, the government should promote the applications. For example, in India we have our IMD apps, we have OSDMA apps, so that people can understand and get the instant awareness and alternative livelihood should be there. For example, if a farmer is a farmer, he should also learn the painting, plumbering, or anything else, because if he's migrating from rural to urban, he should not stay there as a beggar. He should be a skilled labor there. After that, there is a financial government support for making the houses, for giving the insurance, and for the government policy implementations. And for the mobility, there's a seasonal migration after paddy. Exit from, usually people exit from farming. There's a short-term evacuation and temporary displacement. I will end with the line that if we take care of the adaptation actions, there will be a negative feedback mechanism at the climate impact. So with this, I conclude. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the feedback loop. Lastly, our rebellious indigenous group is going to present. Who will be presenting on your behalf? Okay. Welcome up. And I'm kidding, of course, you guys are perfectly well behaved.
Yeah, thank you so much, seven of you, for just giving out the inputs. So I'll just summarize what are the key points that we have found. So from the first paper, we have two paper. One is Alaska, and the second one is the three countries, indigenous tribe, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. So in the first paper, what we found, the key points, I'll just summarize it. Erosion and flooding, and OSTAC. OSTAC means subsidence of land, community displacement, and infrastructure, food security. So these are the social factors. So I'm just coming towards what the slide is saying. So the climate factor is increased air temperature. So and increased ocean temperature, ice loss, and extreme weather events, and increased precipitation. So what they do a displacement, community displacement, also infrastructure damage. And so in the climate impact hazards, so storm surge, coastal erosion, and due to the coastal erosion, people have to migrate. So in the both paper, we find some commonalities. And then there's also impact on the livelihood and the fishing community is directly impacted due to the coastal erosion, and the food cycle and the pattern is directly or indirectly impacting. So loss of lives, and it is also impacting on the food security. Natural resources changes food patterns and creating a class differences. So when they are migrating from one place to another, so they have to lose their identity, social identity, language. So there are a lot of social and economic factors are associated it when they are doing migration. Then we are coming towards the indirect effects. So transportation of goods and services and health issues. So the adaptation point in the one of the paper, two papers were there. So in one of the paper, the Sami tribe, so they created a Sami parliament for having a positive kind of impact, to take a positive discussions or things from the particular community. And then monitoring environmental change, economic assessment of mitigation. And Sami, as I said, that Sami parliament is a kind of a example of democracy and an accountability in a form in that particular climate change scenario. So the collaborating with a central agency, hazard mitigation plans. So these are the key points that what we have found it. So I would come towards the community and culture disruption, loss of culture heritage, social disintegration, and loss of ancestral lands. And when we are coming towards the social livelihood or capital in a sense, so in that sense they are also losing a social circle, and economic vulnerability, subsistence disruption. So these are the three circles. One is the whole this climate change impact is going towards economic factor, the social factor, and there I would say in a sense of a political factor as well, a political choice and all. And so one of the point which I liked from one of the Sami tribe, what they took. So community-based participation, and somehow they are also losing a traditional ecological knowledge. What we found the commonalities of the both the papers. So resilience planning, relocation strategies, and integrated governance system structures that we found the commonalities, and risk assessment and modelings. So this is the kind of, I didn't took a lot of time just summarizing that this whole paper gives, both the paper gives that governance, good governance can give a good structure of policies, and community based monitoring, resilience planning. So strategy should be more grassroots strategy. It should not be top down strategy. It should be a bottom up approach. It should be more a policentric approach, taking out all the stakeholders in the mind. Yes, we are making this policy, so we have to take a tribes perspective as well, government perspective, and the local sector which is working over there. So I think this whole paper is giving that they are also giving, when they are making the in the Sami parliament, taking account of a traditional ecological knowledge. It is playing a crucial role when we are adapting strategies. So it is a major factor, traditional ecological knowledge. So as a geographer, we work on more on traditional knowledge. So this could be a kind of traditional knowledge plus the policy which is top down policy. So it could give a good constructive policy. Yeah.
Okay, I'm aware of time, so we're going to have to wrap up very shortly. I wanted to first congratulate all the groups in looking at these issues in a kind of systemic way, looking at the causal linkages. I think, we talk about indigenous people, obviously in these two countries, in the U.S. and particularly in Canada. I will say we don't have a case example from Canada, but also in Finland, there's a real interest. There might be interest in looking at how some of their abilities to organize and mitigate risk by working in an organized way as communities might translate to an Indian context, and where scheduled tribes might be able to advocate on their own behalf by organizing themselves. I think that was an interesting element that came out. Each one of these highlighted, each one had different climate risks. If we were going to start talking about systemic factors that produce risk in each location, we would have a much longer conversation about some of the factors in, perhaps land ownership in Bangladesh, or, who gets to own land, who doesn't own land, factors such as in coastal Senegal, who gets to control the fisheries. Turns out that it's not ocean temperatures per se in Senegal that are affecting, they are, I'm sure, affecting fish stocks. But the fact is that the government is basically allowing foreign trawlers to suck up all the most high value fishes. So the biggest and largest fishing impact is from those foreign trawlers, leaving very little fish left for the traditional artisanal fishermen. So those are systemic factors, because essentially they're operating at kind of higher levels. The communities really can't control those factors as much. Could have to do with corruption too. I know that there's a fair amount of corruption in the fisheries sector. So you've brought out a number of things. I'd love to talk a little bit more. Maybe we'll have an opportunity tomorrow to bring out what were some of the vulnerabilities, the underlying societal vulnerabilities upon which these climate factors were superimposed. You brought out some of that in your discussion, but I think there could be more elaboration. Great work. Thank you for your hard work today. Take a well-deserved rest tonight, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning. Is it 10 a.m.? 10 a.m. All right. Dr. Rahman may have a word or two for you. He's never a man at loss for words, but nor am I.
The word just, no, I wish to congratulate that you have taken a very active participation. And I like the idea of Dr. Alex, what he has made this in this session. This is unique. It should not be only, one way. So congratulations to all of you that he made hard work. He said 2 hours Saturday evening after 4 hours lecture, and dispersed the documents to you, and you made an effort, and amazed with your presentation. Wonderful. Mubarak to all of you. Very good. So we'll meet tomorrow. We'll go for the tea refreshment in the guest house, and then you are free to go wherever you wish to go in Delhi. Okay, we'll meet 10 o'clock morning, no later than 10 o'clock. Please be on time. Thank you.